So I would say one of the, if not the foundational premise behind the work that Hans and I have done is, let me walk you into this premise. Often we critique politics or economics as systems and structures that operate at a distance from ourselves, and feel in our critique that we possess some insight that we would like our politicians to share and to follow, and if they followed our wisdom, all would be well. Sort of the armchair pundit. So in perhaps the old economy, there is based this sense of distance between a commodity and the market, between buyers and sellers. Kind of the Cartesian model of a substance, a thing that is not connected to other things. So we grab these things, we place them into packages or bundles, and then we're able to sell these independent entities to the market, quote unquote. Speaking for, I guess, our orientation to our approach to interacting with the economy, imagine, if you would, the outer ecology of the economic world as a mirror of the inner ecology of your own self. That there is no way one can separate the inner workings of one's own ecological life world with the outer economy. And so for a meaningful transformation to occur in the outer economy, it's necessarily conjoined with a depth of analysis and transformation on our own inner lives. The outer economy makes certain assumptions about who we are as human beings, about how communities interact with each other, how citizens function, and all these assumptions are internalized in our sense of the world, in how we construct ourselves as individuals and members of a society. So our journey started in university. We were both undergraduate students, and I think in many ways saw the process of education mimicking the economic structures that we felt were harmful. So the only way you can create a citizenry who operates in an economic system that is harmful is if you somehow train them to do so. And we felt, in terms of the pressures that we experienced as students, not only the pressures but the disconnect between our classroom and the actual implications of our economic life as citizens in Alberta, that there was a huge gulf. And our journey started when we tried to bridge this gulf between learning in a classroom and what happens in Alberta's economics. And just as one example, so we're training tens of thousands of undergraduate students every year. They graduate in a 4-year, they come out with a BSc or a BEd or a BA, and very few of them have any idea how to manage the largest industrial project in the history of human civilization. So we as Albertans are responsible for this project. We are the owners of the resource of this project. And yet somehow in our educational process, we are not educated to actually understand its implications, its complexities, its contradictions, and how our very life is based to one degree or another on the benefits and consequences of this activity. So it was our wish to bridge this gap. So I'll let Hans talk a bit about our classroom and what we did as a classroom and some of the kind of evolutions or unfoldings from that place.
Thanks, Raj. Everyone can hear me as well here? Great. So Raj touched on the idea that we both found ourselves in university and experienced this disconnection from what really was happening around us. And we graduate and then find ourselves wondering how to manage the oil sands, the tar sands, because we've spent our education far from that very project. And so in certainly speaking for myself in school, I saw what was happening around us and wondered, how does this connect in any way to what I'm learning in the classroom? And how am I going to go out into the world from this place and actually participate in shaping the future that we're heading for, so that it doesn't simply shape us? And I guess that was quite frustrating, speaking for myself, and that it was difficult to transform that frustration into something constructive. But with the help of David and others like Dr. Dietmar Mondell and my fellow students Raj and several others, we began to dig into these issues for ourselves, specifically the issue of hydraulic fracturing, but not only through reading the scientific literature, but actually by talking directly with stakeholders and with Albertans who are living the experiences of development of oil and gas. One of the ways we did that was by hosting a conference on hydraulic fracturing in 2012 that ended up being the first of 4 annual conferences so far. The most recent one was just 2 weekends ago now. And we brought together landowners who've been impacted by development. We brought together business leaders from different oil and gas companies, representatives from the Alberta government, First Nations, environmental groups, and we invited all of those perspectives together to really help paint a picture for each of us as to what is really happening on the ground. And the premise was that we couldn't really get a sense of what was going on. We couldn't really have a meaningful conversation without everyone at the table. And so we brought everyone together and began talking about fracking in Alberta, and hearing these different stories that seemed to so contradict each other. And of course our own familiarity with those stories through the media makes it clear that there are these polarized camps that seem to really simply pit against each other. And of course, that's no way to move forward in a way that can serve our collective benefit in the long term.
So I think one of the visions for the conference was, there's that old saying, I think it's attributed to Einstein, but I don't think he said it. You can't change the problems with the same level of consciousness that started the problems. And once again, I think we really look to ourselves as being responsible as Albertan citizens, as Albertans. This is our economy, this is our resource, and if it's not being thought about in a way that is reflective of our capacities as a society, then it is up to us as students to do something about that. And what we observed in our culture is, although we have the world's best scientific training, we have engineers, we have hydrologists, we have geologists with unprecedented technology. Somehow we are not putting these resources to use to actually think about a complex problem like fracking in Alberta. And what we observed in our culture is we divide up into camps. Either you're for the environment, or you're anti-industry, or you're building the economy. And our measure of these divided conversations, the first half of the topic for today, was that we were not using our diversity as a strength. That the way it plays out is you find your people, you create a culture there, and then you fight off anybody who tries to interfere with your personal interests. And we notice that as students, so you're either in engineering, or you go kind of the greenie stream and you go into environment. And we don't really talk to each other. And then when we get spewed out into the economic system, we're used to not talking to each other, getting good grades within our discipline, and then moving forward with that. So in our imagination, we thought being democratic citizens, being people who are free agents, we can create a discourse that reflects our potential as Alberta's people. And so we invited people to come to Camrose, Alberta. We invited everyone to come, and we sat people down at tables like the ones you're sitting at. So round tables, decorated in a kitchen kind of home country style. So the image was to sit people down at a kitchen table at the farm and have people create a frame where we're not pitting one against the other, but bringing people who have strengths and different views. And if we create that energy of a common table, then that will be a place where we actually can find solutions. So that was the vision for the conference, and it's very interesting what kind of positive energy is released when people aren't fighting against each other. And what becomes contentious, so these divisions, actually is an energy that is potential. And the feedback we heard from government representatives, industry representatives, farmers, is that they'd never been to a forum like that. They'd never been, usually they went to conferences for industry folks, or conferences for environmental folks, or meetings for disgruntled landowners. And so when they emerged from these silos, they often found themselves arguing against each other. So I think for us this demonstrated our capacity, especially as just students, to create new pathways to new places, and the confidence we had in the round table that we didn't actually have the answers, but that in creating this table, the answers would come. That none of us actually from our own siloed positions would actually bring about. One of the conclusions from the conference is that a key piece that was missing from the political table, the decision-making table, were the experiences of people on the ground. And we found that their wisdom was actually they should be leading rather than kind of the people who are brushed aside and kind of ignored. They should be leading the conversation because their insights and understandings are key to actually understanding how to make this better and how to make it work. So Hans and Allison spearheaded a project over the summer called Alberta Voices.
So I was actually in Cuba in the spring of 2013, studying there, learning Spanish, and I received an email from Dr. Mundell, who I mentioned earlier, suggesting that a couple of students should volunteer to start collecting the stories of. Am I still on? Yep. Collecting the stories of these people on the ground, of farmers and First Nations and others who are really right at the forefront of development. And so I said, okay. And I came back from Cuba and spent the summer alongside Alison Bordelon, another student, developing relationships with farmers from across Alberta, and beginning to just listen to their stories. And what we found is for many of them, their stories had actually never been heard, even by their neighbors, or even by their family members, just because the whole sphere of conversation is so contentious and so volatile, because livelihoods are caught up in it, because farmland is caught up in it, because fathers and brothers and sisters are working in the industry, because the hometown arena is subsidized by the local oil and gas company, because it is so deeply integrated into so many parts of our lives. To challenge it simply isn't allowed. So when a farmer finds that there's changes in their well water and they suspect it's because of recent oil and gas activity, in many cases they actually would simply go to the operator and expect that we'll deal with this, and we've had a good relationship with you for the last 20 years, and we've been grateful for the lease revenue, but we need to fix this problem with our water. And certainly there will be cases where problems are dealt with, but in many cases landowners have been surprised to find that it's simply ignored. And so from the operator, they might, and this is the story of many folks who you can hear on the website albertavoices.ca, where these films are published. From the operator, they might go to Alberta Environment at the time, which still responsible for the enforcement of certain environmental policies, and then be told to go to the Energy and Resources Conservation Board, the ERCB, which is now the Alberta Energy Regulator, only to be sent kind of on this runaround. And still nobody's investigated what's actually happened to the well water, except for that the landowners start to notice certain things changing. And so we have these experiences on the ground that simply go unheard. And the landowners are really left to deal with it on their own, because the neighbor next door across the fence is still quite happy with, or maybe even just kind of stuck and without much liberty to do anything except because of a dependence on those oil and gas revenues. So there's really a culture of silence that was difficult to penetrate, but we learned a lot through. There's a culture of silence that was very difficult to penetrate, but we were able and honored to be able to listen to those stories and capture that in film so that they might be shared not only with other Albertans but contributed to and a part of the conversation that's ongoing, that's otherwise so dominated by certain more powerful bodies that are able to organize and so on. And again, the idea there was in bringing forward those marginalized voices, to have everyone at the table so that the policymakers and company leaders and landowners can really be speaking to each other rather than against each other.
So I suppose one of the things that we are hoping to model is a new spirit of how contentious, divisive issues are approached. And I think there's a couple key elements. One is a sense of a common table, that we are all participants here, and a spirit that no matter where you come from or what your perspective is, you have a place here, and an important place. The other element is to not be afraid of the suffering. either the suffering of people who've been adversely affected, or the suffering and fear of those who are worried about their jobs. And if you look at how this plays out in the media, both of those things are dealt with in ways that are not honoring. They're either sensationalized. We like when people are dismissive. The controversy is kind of what plays most forward, and then people kind of fall into this way of interacting. But humans have a capacity for a very different way of being with the challenges of life. And it's that deeper human capacity that I think, well, is reflected in Ronning Center discourse about this spiritual element, this human, deeper human element that is underneath the surface of all of these difficult human spaces. And unless we can find a grounding, and Hats and I each in our own way find our grounding from this deeper place of a sense of receiving the challenge that is being human here, and using that ground as the ground to enter these more troublesome elements of our lives. So I'm not sure if...
And further to that, we're all a part of this, and I think going back to education, it's easy to become illusioned that we're not a part of it because it's all going on outside. And it's no surprise then that when we emerge from that isolation, we still hold on to that illusion, and it makes it easy, actually, to just really let things happen to us, rather than looking to shape how things happen for us. And I guess in that, as given that we're all a part of this, given that the farmer is a part of it, who's on the land, either perhaps experiencing adverse effects, perhaps receiving lease revenue, perhaps struggling to voice concerns because there's not really an atmosphere that welcomes that in the community, whether you, as a company shareholder or employee, really just also trying to put food on the table, or as an environmentalist with concern, but also entrenched in the current economy and the current energy structure, flicking the lights on and boiling a cup of tea. We really all are a part of it, and that speaking against each other doesn't get us anywhere. And so, right from our education systems through to the very economy that supports that system, that education system, we really need to recognize that and then participate and educate and employ ourselves in ways that reflect that. And as far as we can do that, we can really move forward in a different way.
And I think that sets up the ground for kind of how we've approached our work and how we've gone about our activities. There are two main outgrowths of that, main projects that we're working on now. The first, Hans, is, maybe you can describe it.
Sure. So one of the main big things that we learned through the Alberta Voices filming project was that as students we actually really can participate in what's going on now. In that case, through filming, listening to these stories, and making those voices heard and providing a platform for them to become a part of the public conversation. And so with that, learning that and seeing that students, undergraduate students can as part of their education, be citizens and be directly involved in ongoing and important conversations. seeing that, we wondered how can we share that with other students, because there's 200,000 students in Alberta, virtually all of whom really have high aspirations of what our province could look like. So why not take advantage of that capacity? And so, again, beginning with education, we are in the slow development of a research program led by undergraduate students, based partly on the principles that guided our work with Alberta Voices and when hosting the conference, and in our own individual undergraduate research. Developing this program so that other students can also begin doing research in a different way, and in a certain sense, so that the work that is done, all of these students are working so very hard, so that the work is actually not only interesting and or as interesting as it can be, but helpful. How can it be helpful to the community as a whole? And so through this program, students will be leading their research and engaging with various partners in the community, many of the same partners who were at our initial conference a couple of years ago and who we've been working with since. So policy developers and people in the industry, people on the ground with the layman knowledge that is really quite astounding as to the nature of oil and gas policy, the nature of oil and gas development in many levels. Students will be drawing those partners in to inform the research, to inform the partners, and in doing so, we can create a gathering point for a very different kind of conversation that really continues the work that was started at the 2012 conference. We've brought everyone together enough to hear many different perspectives, and this work, hopefully led by students, can create the frame that is needed to continue that conversation.